In the last 15 years, I've used and tested over hundreds of cameras, and I've compiled down a list of the 10 most important things to look out for when shopping for one, so your hard-earned dollars will not go wasted on something that does not fit your needs.
The Vong's Guide to Buying Cameras.
And I'll also be including some of my personal recommendations at the end of the video.
Sensor size.
So the first thing I would look out for is the size of the camera sensor, and it's usually the first thing listed on the website description. For example, the Sony ZV-E10 on B&H.com, right under key features, 24.2 megapixel APS-C sensor. The Canon PowerShot G7X, 20.2 megapixel 1-inch stacked CMOS sensor. Now, sensor sizes matter because it's what's going to really help us level up from the photos that we can take from our phones. And since most phones use a sensor size smaller than 1 inch, obviously we're going to want something larger than 1 inch. But without boring you too much with the differences between all of these different sensor sizes, I recommend cameras with at least an APS-C sensor. At this point here, we're definitely going to get better image quality over our phones, better low light performance, and that signature pro look, that beautiful background blur, aka authentic portrait mode. But the reason why I highly recommend APS-C cameras to beginners is because 1, they tend to be lighter and smaller, 2, a very affordable ecosystem, especially when it comes to shopping for lenses, and 3, they're not just for beginners. APS-C is very much capable to produce pro results that can rival bigger sensors. And Fujifilm and Sony make some of the best mirrorless cameras in the market right now, and I'll have my personal recommendations for you at the end of the video.
Mirrorless versus DSLR.
Speaking of mirrorless, we need to update your lingo, because loads of people are still calling every pro camera they see a DSLR. But actually, mirrorless cameras are not DSLRs. Again, without getting to the whole technical mumbo jumbo of things, in summary, DSLRs are old technology. They have fewer autofocus points, they are slower to focus, there's a lot of guesswork involved, plus they're chunky and they're clunky. Mirrorless cameras, on the other hand, are new technology. They're sexy, they're way better at autofocusing, they even have human face and eye autofocus, which will make all of our lives so much easier. And any setting changes that we make on the camera, we'll see on our screen as we're making them. We call that real-time preview, which will make learning camera basics so much easier. And that's something that we can't do with DSLRs. And plus, mirrorless cameras are way better for video as well. Now, the only pro that I see with DSLRs is that you can get them for cheap. So if you're doing strictly photography and want to save a ton of money, DSLRs and lenses made for DSLRs might be worth considering if you're willing to put up with the bigger learning curve.
Saving money.
Photography versus videography.
So like we were just saying, mirrorless cameras are better for photos and they're better for videos. However, depending on how much and how important video is to you, this is an area where we can actually save some extra money. So let me break this down into 3 separate tiers, and this will make a lot of sense to you by the end of this section. Mirrorless cameras that are capable of shooting max 1080p full HD would be the cheapest. And there's nothing wrong with 1080p videos, they are still being widely viewed to this day, especially on social media and on your phone. So you don't really need 4K. But if you want 4K, cameras that are capable of shooting max 4K 30 frames per second are actually coming down in price. However, cameras that are capable of shooting 4K 60 frames per second, 120 frames per second, and even beyond that, like 8K, they're expensive, and it's these higher video specs that drive up the prices of modern day mirrorless cameras. However, if you're doing strictly photos, you can largely ignore these types of cameras. You can get an older mirrorless camera that came out 10 years ago for cheap, like this Sony a6000 right here, and the results will still be just as good as the photos from cameras that came out today. As long as the camera can shoot raw photos, you actually have a lot of powers in your hands to edit them into stunning images. Besides that, I would argue as long as the camera has human face detection autofocus, it's gonna be good enough.
Phase versus contrast detection autofocus.
Now, speaking of autofocus, there's something that we need to look out for in the description. What kind of autofocus system is the camera using? And I would say this is one of my biggest deal breakers. Not to be confused with face autofocus, you want to look out for something called phase detection autofocus. Basically, this is what enables the camera to have that snappy and fast autofocus, especially when you're tracking a moving subject. You want to have this, especially when it comes to video. You want the camera to focus immediately on you or your subject. What you don't want is contrast only detection. It's just slow AF. In both meanings. It's kind of like us waking up without our morning coffee. We can still function, but just very slowly. Now, most mirrorless cameras up to 10 years back will likely have both, so it's not going to be a huge problem. But there will be 1 or 2 models that only have contrast detection autofocus, and that's something that you need to be wary of. Make sure it has phase detection autofocus.
You talking about my face?
In-body image stabilization.
My second biggest deal breaker. A camera that I'm shopping for should always have in-body image stabilization, or IBIS for short, not the hotel. It is this mechanism inside the camera that helps compensate for shakes when you're hand holding it to ensure that you get sharp results. And it's usually measured by stops. 5 is usually typical, anything more than that is pretty amazing. Now with that said, having IBIS is not entirely necessary if you're doing strictly photos. Utilizing a faster shutter speed will ensure you sharp results. It's when you're shooting videos that IBIS becomes a necessity. It is a night and day difference having it versus not having it. And the frustrating thing is, there are still modern day mirrorless cameras that are coming out that does not have built-in image stabilization. However, they will at least have electronic or digital image stabilization, which will compensate for the shakes, but at the cost of heavily cropping into your video to do so. Now, I usually have a 20-minute rant about this, but for the sake of keeping this video to the point, digital stabilization is fine. What's not fine is if you're shopping for an older mirrorless camera that does not have both built-in IBIS or electronic image stabilization. So you're gonna wanna look out for lenses that have stabilization built into them instead, and that will solve your shaky handheld video problems. But honestly, lenses that have stabilization built into them are becoming few and far between. So I would look out for camera models that have in-body image stabilization. That way you can use any lenses without worrying about shaky footage. USB-C. I know, it sounds stupid, right? But believe it or not, USB-C ports on cameras weren't that common until 2021. So it's important to keep this in mind if you're shopping for a camera that came out before that. Now, obviously, USB-C is super important when it comes to charging your camera, and it's nice because it uses the same cable that we would use to charge our phone, so it's very convenient.
If you say so.
Honorable mentions.
Usually honorable mention comes before the last point, but I want to share them with you now because it's all part of the camera body. These aren't necessarily deal breakers in my opinion, but just some things to consider.
Screens.
There are roughly 3 types of screen: tilt, flip up, and flip out. The most popular is the flip out screen, which is very handy for vlogging, TikToking, and shooting vertical videos.
Electronic viewfinder.
AKA the eye cup. Don't spell that out loud. Now, some mirrorless cameras don't have them, but the ones that do have an electronic viewfinder, they're nice, especially when you're using the camera in bright situations. It just helps you see your images better before and after you take them.
Weather sealing.
Usually it'll say dust or moisture resistant, which means you can use the gear in light rain and snow, but usually most people would avoid using their cameras in those types of situations anyway, so it's not a terrible deal if the camera does not have it.
2 card slots.
The internet loves to make a big fuss when a camera only has 1 card slot, and their thinking is totally valid if your livelihood depends on it. Now, having 2 card slot means the photos and videos would get saved to both cards simultaneously, so in case one of them fails on you, you still have 1 good card that has all of your files. You can imagine how important that is in a professional environment.
High-speed continuous burst shooting.
You're going to want to look out for cameras that can shoot 7 to 11 frames per second if you're planning to capture fast-moving subjects like cars, kids sports, or animals. Anything that can do 20 frames per second raw bursts will probably cost you a pretty penny. Okay, back to the list.
Megapixels.
Wow, okay, I didn't mean for this to be so low on the list, but it needs to be said. More megapixels does not mean the camera is more better. Some smartphones can do 40 to 100 megapixels and the photos can still look like sh. Again, it all goes back to the size of the sensor. That's where being bigger matters. But when it comes to photography, especially sharing online or printing photos, 20 to 26 megapixels is more than enough. When you go to 40 to 60 megapixels on these mirrorless cameras, that's helpful if you plan on doing a lot of cropping into your photos, but aside from that, for beginners, it's actually going to be more of a burden on your hard drive space.
Lenses matter.
Forgive me, but I need to put a lot of emphasis on this. Skip these lens bundles. Skip these lens bundles. Skip these lens bundles. Seriously, I think a lot of people who pick up these camera kits that come with a basic zoom lens ultimately drop photography fast because the results that they were getting aren't drastically different from what they're getting from their phones. And I don't blame them. It's 2025. Lenses nowadays matter a lot more in the smartphone world. And I actually hate to admit this, but there were a few short years where it was actually getting hard to justify to someone to get a camera versus just using their phones because the most affordable quality lenses were still priced at $500.
$500?
But now there are actually decent quality lenses that are coming out, and at under $200 a pop, that's a steal. For example, Viltrox have these Air Series Prime lenses that have those faster apertures, and those are gonna get you those background blur and better low light and night photos. And they make them for Fuji, Nikon, and Sony. And one of the lenses that I've been recommending, especially for APS-C cameras, is a 25mm f1.7, an absolute perfect everyday lens for photography. Just make sure you're choosing the right mount for your camera.
Buying used versus buying new.
So a lot of beginners and even pros are shopping for used camera gear these days. I mean, we can shop a generation or two behind the current model right now and still get a very good and capable camera system for way less. Which sounds great, right? But you gotta be careful where you're buying from. Shopping from sites like eBay and Facebook Marketplace, it's gonna be hard to tell if there are any undisclosed damages, especially when you don't know what to look out for. I don't know about you, but I can't live with that anxiety in my life. So it's always best to shop from reputable camera stores. Not your general electronics store, but camera stores like B&H or even resale sites like MPB or KDH. Yeah, I realize I'm just saying letters to you. Since they specialize in camera equipment, the resale items they have should be properly inspected, and they also have some sort of money-back guarantee at no extra cost to you if you end up changing your mind. And with the knowledge I just given you in this video, you should be able to shop for a used model more confidently.
I'm ready.
The Vong's Personal Rex.
So I'll have 3 different cameras at 3 different price points, but we'll start with the lens first. So earlier I mentioned the Viltrox 25mm f1.7. Again, it's a great everyday photography lens that will instantly level up from your phone photos, give you those nice background blur, and better low light images. All of that at an incredibly affordable price of $180. But it is available for 2 of my favorite systems, Fujifilm and Sony. Now for Fuji, I highly recommend the XM5. Along with the Viltrox lens, you're getting an amazing setup at around $1,000. Amazing photos, great colors, 6K videos. Now sadly, it does not have the in-body image stabilization that I was talking about, but it does have digital image stabilization. For Sony, the ZV-E10 will be the most affordable option, especially around the holidays. You can nab one for about $500 to $600. It does 4K, it has some of the best-in-class autofocus, but it does not have in-body image stabilization, but the digital image stabilization will do the job. Otherwise, the Sony a6700 has been an ongoing favorite of mine. It is pricier, but damn is it worth it. Obviously great photos, but it does 4K up to 120 frames per second, and it does have in-body image stabilization. And I'll have links to the individual reviews for each of these cameras if you want to learn more about them. But before you go, let me leave you with some wisdom. Follow your heart. I know it sounds cringy and I know it sounds cheesy, but this is especially true. When you research cameras online, you're gonna get a lot of noise. There will be people absolutely trashing the camera that you're thinking about getting. Oh, it doesn't have this. Oh, it doesn't have that. Camera companies are being greedy nowadays. Blah, 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 blah. Like we've been saying throughout this entire video, a lot of these cameras are so good already, so don't let the naysayers sway you into getting a different camera that's supposedly better. If it does not vibe with you, you'll never use it. So you might as well get the one that you like, and that will inspire you to take more photos. If you guys appreciate this video, just simply stick around and listen to what my sponsor Squarespace has to say. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform to create beautiful websites. No coding knowledge needed. It's perfect if you want to showcase your photos, sell prints, and run your business online all in one place. And with Blueprint, Squarespace's new AI-powered website builder, getting started has never been easier. Just answer a few quick questions and it instantly builds a custom site with layouts, colors, and even sample content. Plus, built-in SEO tools to help more people discover your site. Use my link down below for a 14-day free trial, and when you're ready to launch, use code JASONVONG to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you guys in the next video. Peace.